Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, as city council members struggle to cut $14 million from the budget, state DOJ officials encourage them to cut 14 times more than that. A controversial jail death is now being investigated by the FBI. Regulators and media continue to police speech after the death of Charlie Kirk. A local developer sees the utility of redeveloping the historic JEA downtown tower, and high school basketball tourneys return to the First Coast after 50 years. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Nate Monroe, executive editor at the Tributary. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning, Ann.
Randy DeFoor, attorney and former Jacksonville City Council member. Good morning, Randy.
Good morning, Ann.
And Anthony Austin, anchor at First Coast News.
Good morning, Ann.
Thanks for being here.
No problem.
And always thanks for getting up early.
I'm actually off.
Oh, this is vacation day.
I came in on my day off just for you.
Wow, that is extraordinary. Above and beyond the call. So this is less than a week now before the City Council is going to vote on next year's city budget. And Florida's chief financial officer made a second visit to Jacksonville in recent weeks, accusing city leaders of overspending by some $200 million. So this is CFO Blaise Ngolia. He was here Wednesday to deliver sort of an update on his DOJ audit of the city that began in August. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We got to what the budget should be under normal, sane circumstances with people who are somewhat fiscally responsible with their money. And they were $200 million over that number. That's an astounding number. And I'm going to tell you, the number in reality is probably higher, probably in the $230 to $240 million range. So we today are deeming $200 million of Jacksonville's budget as excessive and definitely wasteful.
So David Bauerlein, he did not provide a lot of specifics about where he's finding that money, what exactly he believed to be excessive, but he essentially was looking over the last 5 years since 2019. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something that could be done in a few minutes. Basically, what he did was just kind of say, here's your starting point in the 2020 budget. Here's what the current budget is. Here's how much it's grown year by year. If you didn't index it for inflation and population growth, and just which is a formula, which doesn't necessarily respond to the political needs that council members are hearing or the realities of what the city's budget is all about. But on paper, he's saying, it could be $200 million less, and you would have grown the budget enough to account for just the cost of inflation, driving up the cost of services and providing services to more people. So he didn't go in and say, and here's where you could cut the $200 million, just saying, here's how I would do it if I were king, basically, in terms of how the budget would be done.
That he would cut it, but not saying what to cut. And so, Randy, one of the reasons that the budget has gone up, according to the Deegan administration, and they responded to this, saying we're spending, first of all, that we already have the lowest property tax rate of any major Florida city. And I know that's something that Nate has also been commenting about on social media. So we'll talk about that. But she's basically saying this is mostly going to these big raises that we've given to police and fire and to growing expenses for things like first responders in our budget.
Right. I know people around this table remember we were losing our police and fire right and left because of the change in the pension. So we were bringing these young individuals in, we were training them, and then we were losing them to other counties. And so the only way we were able to keep them was to increase their salaries. So, and again, this man has come in, quite honestly, to somehow embarrass the administration. But the truth is, let's remember, the budget belongs to who? To the city council. It's the city council's budget. And so they're the ones that really should be answering these questions.
And Nate, this is a budget analysis that spans 2 mayoral administrations, including a Republican predecessor, and also, that's been approved by an overwhelmingly Republican city council during this period.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the kind of long arc of city spending over the last 30 years, the mix has not changed all that much. And it really just kind of reflects the sort of bipartisan kind of rough consensus that exists within City Hall about the importance of public safety, the need to redevelop downtown, the investment in the Jaguars. I mean, that's your general fund right there, a library system and parks, and that's it. Is it overspending? I mean, overspending is an opinion. It's an unfalsifiable sort of view that you can take of the budget. If you don't care about our parks, then yeah, we're overspending because we spend too much on parks. It's not a very substantive statement, and I would be skeptical in the extreme that this kind of budget roadshow even really has all that much to do with the budget, right? This is an appointed CFO who wants to become Florida's elected CFO. There are not a whole lot of reasons why the CFO has to be barnstorming across the state. This is as good an excuse as any.
Yeah, and he did a similar appearance in Orlando as well, basically saying they're $200 million over their budget. But, even the city council members, Anthony, that appeared with the CFO at this event, who have supported rolling back our property tax rate by 1/8 of a mil, seem to acknowledge that what the CFO was proposing, a $200 million cut from the budget, just simply wasn't feasible at this stage of the game.
Right. I thought it was interesting, too, because listening to him speak at that news conference, he said this is not just an issue with the Democrats, it's also a Republican issue as well when it comes to overspending. So something he's been citing that is kind of contributing to this, he said that the city added over 600 new positions, and also salaries were up more than 23% in just 4 years. But as Randy was mentioning, the mayor has said, hey, we've been putting more money into the budget for police and for firefighters. And we know that the Fraternal Order of Police and also the Jacksonville Firefighters Association, they said, hey, we've had promises made to us in the past, and now we're finally kind of getting to the point where we're recruiting the people that we need for police, for fire, and this is a dangerous, slippery slope that we're going down if these cuts are made.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's headlines, and you are welcome to join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We've got a call from Mark in Jacksonville. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm shaking my head ruefully over here that they say, DOGE is saying we're, $220 million short, and nobody even mentions the Jaguars. Yeah, that one check could have taken care of that 5 times. Do they not calculate that, or is it untouchable? Or
I mean, I guess that's an open question. It doesn't seem like anything this council or this mayor wants to touch. I mean, they seem committed to spending for the Jaguars.
That's the rub, right? I mean, it's easy to just be someone with no skin in the game and say you should cut $250 million out of this budget. To actually have to do that and to weigh people's what people want out of their city government and what they want out of their community with what's needed, with just this kind of arbitrary number to cut. I mean, the CFO isn't going to be the one making those decisions.
I mean, it's interesting that you say with skin in the game, Nate, because in the past you have been pretty critical of groups that sort of covertly or behind the scenes object to something and then don't speak out about it publicly. In this case, you have some very prominent groups being very vocal opposing the cuts, including the Fraternal Order of Police, Jacksonville Fire and Rescue, their firefighters union, and the Civic Council.
Right. Which, I think that to some degree reflects some leadership changes in the city that have happened in the last several years. But I also think that this city has a long history of defending its budgeting. The state has tried to sort of unilaterally cut property taxes before, and this is something that Jacksonville leaders fought against years and years ago. Again, there has been a bipartisan consensus in the city for a long time that to have a nice city, you have to pay for it. This kind of new era of kind of performative fiscal conservatism, I think, is really a new kind of dynamic in the city. And so I think part of what you're seeing is like an autoimmune response to that in some ways.
David, this proposal from the CFO goes even beyond what Councilmember Rory Diamond has been proposing. He's been advocating for basically cutting a mill instead of an eighth of a mill, and that would be about half of what the CFO says needs to be cut. And his view has been most people have considered that, beyond their imagining in terms of like making a cut this year of that size. And, he was one of the three people at this meeting with the CFO, but they are looking forward. They do want to continue cutting, they've said, in the years to come.
That's what they say. Although in this current budget year, the budget that's going to be voted on Tuesday, yes, there have been some changes by city council, particularly to go after some initiatives the mayor had. But the Mayor Deegan did a $2 billion plus budget. It's going to be a $2 billion plus budget the city council votes on. They didn't make a huge change in the revenue. The main difference is they cut $13 million from property taxes, and that's the difference in their budgets, basically. So it's a large budget. It'll be the biggest budget in city history. It's going to go increasing above and beyond the inflation rate. And then on what they call the capital improvements program, which includes we're going to spend $200 million this year as our installment for the Jaguar Stadium. That's as big under the council's version of the budget as is under the mayor's. I think they added a few $1 million to it. So, yes, you can say the spending's a problem, but council members hear from constituents. They know what constituents want. There's a demand for services. They want more services, not less. Clearly, people would like to pay less in property taxes. I mean, that's the way things are. But this is not a budget that greatly reverses the spending trajectory. It kind of builds on what we've seen in the past. To Nate's point, there's a bipartisan consensus in that regard. And in the past, when you've done something like a $775 million for the stadium, the city has said, we need to just have a new tax for this, They did the courthouse 20 years ago, and they said, better Jacksonville plan. Let's do a 0.5-cent sales tax. A few years ago when Randy was on council, they wanted to do a lot of spending for transportation. They said, let's double the local gas tax to be able to create that investment. This time they said, we're going to take on the cost of this stadium. We're not going to increase taxes. So that's a real constraint on what they can do in terms of being able to cut spending and the arc of spending continuing to go up each year, other than sort of these micro-targeting of programs that the mayor has sort of rolled out and would be kind of her signature agenda accomplishments.
Healthcare and such. Yeah, we've got a call from Terry in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Terry. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I look back 2 years ago, the budget was, I think, $1.5 billion. Then it was raised up to about $1.75 billion, and now it's going to be close to $2 billion. So if my numbers are roughly correct, that's a 33% increase in basically 2 or 3 years. And to me, I think where that came from, all of that basically came available because our property values went up substantially over the last 3 years. And so as that happened, what frustrates me is, as that happened, the mayor and the council took all of that dramatic revenue increase and spent it. And at the same time, we had a school tax increase. I'm thinking, what if we had not had a windfall of all of our property values going up so dramatically? What would we have done? And why didn't we just live within that constraint and reduce the millage rate such that we did? And how we got $500 million in 2 years, to me, is just outrageous. And I know the council went along with it. The mayor, I suspect they all liked it. Rory Diamond was on service duty, National Guard duty, so he wasn't around. He's the one guy that normally raised it. Not one other council member pushed back, and the mayor was just fine with it. Everybody got their money. And I can't imagine how much. I have a rental home, and the rent has gone up dramatically on that house for my renters because of the tax increase.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's kind of my perspective. I'm very frustrated with it. I don't know why we can't live within some fiscal constraints. We got a windfall, and all we did was spend it.
Terry, thanks. Randy, I want to ask you about that because I think a lot of people do look at this and say, hey, our property values have been going up and up and up.
Right.
We are paying,
More.
we are paying more in taxes.
Correct.
Why isn't that sufficient? Why are we still spending that full amount?
I do want to raise, first of all, Roy Diamond did vote for the stadium. He did vote for Lot J. He did vote for the gas tax, I believe. I did not vote for the gas tax, if you recall. I don't know if you remember that, David.
I think he voted against the gas tax.
I did.
And I think he did as well.
He did? Okay. This is the thing. At the end of the day, the city is a business, and you have to invest the money appropriately in a business to grow. And we've grown since COVID. The population in the city has significantly increased, which means more services are needed, which means more police is needed, more firemen, more garbage. So when we increase as a population, our expenses increase. So that's one thing I'll mention. Secondly, I think the first caller was correct. I mean, the stadium has cost a lot of money, and it was a decision made by both the administration and the council that we want to be an NFL city. And if you want to be an NFL city, you've got to pay for it. It's just that simple.
The mayor keeps saying, Anthony, that this is, what it costs if you want to be a first-class city. And I think more than any reporter at this table, you have a lot of contact with people who are like, roads not working, my infrastructure is failing. I need the support from the city and they won't get back to me. And so there's a lot of contact that you have with people that feel like city services are not where they need to be. And very often that's a function of how much money is allocated to those services.
Right. I mean, I get emails daily, and I can't tell you how many emails where I'm on a chain with the city council, the mayor, with everyone saying, hey, where's the money for my neighborhood? I have a woman right now. She said, hey, there's a 20-foot deep hole in front of my house right now, and no one from the city has come out to repair it. Why has it not been repaired? So you see, when we're talking about these big budgets and these different situations when it comes to the stadium, people in the community, just your everyday person who's on the street, they say, hey, we need this money for our neighborhood. We need this for our community. We're dealing with this or that. And so, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of concern about where is the money? Where is it being spent at this moment?
What do you expect, David, at this vote on Tuesday? I know you'll be covering it. Do you have any sense as to what the outcome's going to be?
Yeah, I think it'll probably be a 10-9 vote in favor of the 1% cut in the property tax rate. And then there's going to be a huge debate over some amendments that were added that would restrict the city from, or ban the city from spending money on abortions, DEI, or services that assist people who are in the country without authorization, legal authorization. If those three amendments, which are considered poison pills by some council members, get in, then you might not have 10 votes to pass the budget. And if you don't have 10 votes to pass the budget, they're really in uncharted territory. And they may have to just keep voting up. Some people have said it might be an hours and hours and hours long meeting, but you got to have 10 votes to pass the budget. Right now, they don't if those poison pill amendments get in. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. I mean, it's sort of the irresistible force meets the immovable object in political terms. And somebody would have to blink. Somebody would have to go from a no to a yes or a yes to a no for them to get to 10 votes. And if they don't, then there's all sorts of complications. When the next year's budget comes along, you have to use the current year's spending levels. Well, that's a big problem because you have all these pay raises that you have to pay for. The state may come in and be involved in running the city. You lose tens of millions of dollars in state funding. So I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see how that all plays out. So I don't know. I think there will be a budget that's passed. I just don't know whether the budget that's passed will have those restrictions in it or not.
Yeah. Well, if you're just joining us, I'm talking to Nate Monroe, Anthony Austin, Randy DeFoor, and David Bauerlein about the week's headlines, including Tuesday's vote on the city budget. In a bit, we're going to talk about downtown redevelopment of the old JEA Tower and continuing fallout from the murder of activist Charlie Kirk. But first, Nate, I want to move on to a development and a story that the Tributary has been covering now for well, I mean, the jail issue certainly for a couple of years, but most recently, this controversial death of a 31-year-old father named Charles Faggart. Tell us what the latest news is that you all broke this week.
Yeah, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office are going to take the lead on the death investigation of Charles Faggart in the Duval County Jail. And just to reprime listeners, Charles Faggart was booked into the jail in early April on a couple of misdemeanor charges. He was, a kind of budding food truck vendor who was going through a pretty hard time in his life, ends up in jail. After about 6 days in the jail, he was transported to UF Health in very, very bad, potentially fatal condition. He was unresponsive. He was had visible injuries all over his entire body, and he died at the hospital a couple of days later. And there's been this kind of mystery about why he was in such a terrible state. The sheriff stripped 9 corrections officers of their authority in the aftermath of that, but has otherwise said basically nothing about this. We know that there was some sort of violent clash between Charles Faggart and some jail guards, but that's all we know. The state attorney's office, as is pretty typical, has conducted a death investigation, but we don't know the results of that, and is now saying that after consultation, their words, with federal officials, they're having the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office take the lead.
And so this investigation, as you say, it's, de rigueur for the state attorney to be doing these investigations, but the sheriff himself initially asked for federal oversight. He contacted the FBI and asked them to participate. Is this different than what he was asking for, or is this kind of in line with that?
We don't know the answer to that. And I would also say, the sheriff did sort of say that he invited the FBI to take a look at this. I mean, it's not really clear to me if the feds were going to look at this anyway. I have gotten the sense, and I know that others sort of in and around this large investigation have the sense that the feds were kind of interested in this from the beginning. Now, whether that means anything is going to come of this or not, who knows? Part of the I suppose the complicating factor here is that the state attorney's office, when they investigate JSO for potential criminal misconduct, at the end of that investigation, they write up a disposition report, and that report becomes public, and it's usually quite detailed and often has new stuff in it that we did not know. The feds don't work that way. If the feds don't end up charging anyone, it is unlikely in the extreme that we are going to learn very much. And so I would say that is the kind of complicating issue here.
That's interesting, Randy. I mean, as an attorney, is that something that could be a strategic move to prevent information from being released? Is that the kind of thing?
No, I think it's a criminal investigation, and they have constitutional rights. But I think it is interesting that Melissa Nelson transferred it to the, we saw that with the JEA. So that gives me an indication there is something there.
It does.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, so why wouldn't she retain the investigation?
Because I think because then she would have to, she's investigating the sheriff's office, and I think that'd be a pretty uncomfortable position for her. And so therefore she's going to ask the FBI to come in and do it.
But I mean, that's what she's been doing, correct? Like she's been investigating them.
Well, she has that role where she looks at, police shootings and to see if there's any probable cause or any issue. I think is one of her jobs, if you will. But I think in this case, just like in the JEA situation, she needs to. I think she needs to bring in the third party FBI.
Yeah. Anthony, this is something, that the family, and we should say that that Charles Faggart wasn't identified by the sheriff's office. He was identified ultimately by reporters at Nate's publication that, were digging into court records and able to identify him. And then since have, spoken to the family has said that they believe that he was murdered. And the condition, that Nate alluded to certainly is troubling. but we don't have a medical examiner's autopsy at this point.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. And I do want to commend Nate and the Tributary because they have been leading the way on this reporting, because we've been reading their articles, because they've been really pushing to get information from the sheriff's office about this situation, because as Nate mentioned, a lot of information was not released about this from the beginning until, we started pushing, asking what exactly happened here, who was involved, what went on when Charles Faggart was in your custody. But like you just mentioned, we've interviewed family members, we've interviewed Charles Faggart's mother, his friends, and they all believe that he was beaten to death while in custody of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. We know that the medical examiner's report is done, but we don't have the information from that medical examiner's report to tell us exactly what happened, because, if you ask the sheriff's office what happens, it's been different things. I believe, Nate, you can correct me, but I believe they said something about there may have been fentanyl in his system at the time, but I think that may have been disputed by now. So there's a lot of different kind of ideas out there about exactly what happened. We're just trying to get to the bottom of it to figure it out.
David, I think some people would be surprised if you have a loved one that dies in custody, that you wouldn't have more information to go on. I think that, it's been surprising to Charles Faggart's family that, they weren't immediately notified until he was essentially was brain dead. I mean, and he may have been brain dead when he was transported. It sounds like he arrived in that condition, but they, I think, have felt slighted by the fact that they weren't necessarily given additional information about what happened and why.
Yeah, and it's been a long time now since it's all happened. So you can certainly understand the human side of that, which is, the loved one goes into jail alive and healthy, and then they're having a funeral for him. And they've gotten very little information. And, perhaps there's justification for why during the investigation they wouldn't want information to be out while they're also talking to people and want to keep some control over what's out there in public. At this point, though, I probably would think whatever investigation has been done has been done. And just to follow up on what Randy was saying, when I read the Tributary story, I did think as well of JEA. And that was in 2019. Melissa Nelson, the state attorney's office, started that investigation, handed it off to the federal authorities. Federal authorities took it to trial, got a conviction. And I'm not saying at all that's what will happen in this case, but it could be that there's certain statutes or laws that are at the federal level that might apply more to this particular case in the jail than are available at the state level, given the facts of the case. And that may be what the federal authorities want to explore. A little speculation there in terms of applying the law to this case. I just cannot believe that, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that the federal authorities still have a lot of investigating they're going to do. I think probably at this point they know and understand what the investigation has found. It's just a matter of how to bring it, if they do, to any kind of a actual prosecution.
Nate.
Yeah, one thing just to kind of put a bow on this point too, the state attorney would not make this acknowledgement publicly about the feds taking the lead without very closely coordinating that language with the feds. Now, federal prosecutors and the FBI rarely confirm or deny that they're doing anything. So what that means is they are okay with people knowing that they are taking the lead and, in fact, investigating this death, which I think is a statement in and of itself. And that was also true during the JEA stuff. It felt like a statement that they were okay with people knowing that they were taking the lead on it.
And when it comes to the acknowledgement of this investigation being passed essentially fully to the feds, is that something that Melissa Nelson's office offered up, or that you learned about and reached out and were able to confirm by asking them? How did that go down?
And let me say too, I don't know that they are handing over their investigation to the feds. I think they still have, the feds don't investigate local homicides. The state attorney's office, I think, still has a determination that will be made at some point, maybe after federal prosecutors are done with whatever they're looking at, on whether this was a justifiable homicide or whether it was a homicide at all. We don't know because we don't have the medical examiner's report. So I don't know that the state attorney's office is handing everything over. I do think that and I'll also say the state attorney's office has proactively acknowledged that they consulted with the feds and the feds are taking the lead. We have been hearing throughout this entire process that the FBI is doing interviews and that they're around and that there has been interest. And the story is that they've been sort of conducting parallel investigations this entire time. And now the feds are sort of taking the lead, so to speak. So I think it's more the state attorney's office is maybe standing down and letting them do their thing before they move forward on anything that they still have, like any threads that might kind of still be hanging out there.
But this is not like the state attorney's office issued a press release saying this is what's happening with this investigation.
They reached out to us to tell us that. Now we and others in the media ecosystem have been haranguing them and others, for updates about this and, sharing what we hear and trying to get information back. And so I think part of it was that, they may have felt like they owed everyone an update on what was going on.
All right. I want to move on now to a topic that has been, discussed a lot locally and very much nationally. And that's sort of the ongoing fallout from the assassination, the murder of Charlie Kirk, which has had real repercussions for a lot of people here in Florida. I think right now a lot of people are talking about the firing, the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel's show, which is, I think a lot of people are concerned about some First Amendment implications. But a lot of people in Florida, teachers, nurses, university professors, people who work for the state have been disciplined, fired, facing termination, facing suspension because of comments that they made on social media. And it does seem like a new day in terms of people's right to be critical. Randy, I want to start with you in part just from the legal aspect, because these are comments that very often are, incredibly poor taste, some of them very cruel, but that is also sort of, par for the course on social media, I guess
Right.
you'd say.
I do think we're on a slippery slope. For the First Amendment is so important to our democracy. And what's interesting about all this is that Charlie Kirk, that's the thing that he was all about, is having open discourse. So I think that it's an interesting day. If the language or if the commentary is insightful, I get it. But if it's just an opinion, then
You mean like that might incite people
correct.
to do something
To do
harmful?
something. And I
Mhm.
think that's I'm sure that's some of the concern with some of the teachers and some of the other, some of the individuals that have been terminated. Because I do know there are teachers that did that, and I think for parents' sake, they don't want that they don't want their children to see that type of because in no event is it okay. Is killing another individual because they have a difference of opinion okay?
Nate, do you see a difference? We know that there was, a local Clay County teacher that was in the primary school world. Are teachers at that level in a different place than for like a university professor when it comes to saying something, that's cruel or demeaning of somebody that's been killed like this in such a public way?
That is a good question that feels more like a legal question that is a little bit outside the bounds of like what I know about it.
Yeah.
I do not know the answer to that. I think
I guess
I
I'm asking
suspect
not for like
university
a
professors probably enjoy a little bit more autonomy than public school teachers do.
Yeah, I'm asking more sort of for perception because obviously we all work in the business where, the First Amendment is pretty foundational to what we do.
Right.
And so I'm guessing we come to this with a little bit of bias in favor of free speech. But I also can understand that if parents are reading their, fourth graders teacher on social media celebrating the assassination of a prominent conservative figure, that would be troubling to a lot of people.
Yes. And look, I think part of the complication about this moment and a lot of what's happened is you can get sucked into interrogating and then defending, discrete series of comments that different teachers at different levels made about this, and some are more egregious than others. And, as you said, as First Amendment practitioners, essentially, I think journalists have permission to be unapologetic advocates for the First Amendment. And I think the big picture, sort of 30,000-foot view of this moment is that the fact pattern around some of what's gone on, the indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel, the comments from federal regulators at the FCC, from the president and his administration about coercing private companies to take action against people because of speech, that is deeply disturbing. And I think that we can say that unambiguously, unequivocally. That is absolutely deeply troubling, and it feels like we are in a kind of new world.
Yeah, and this is, Anthony, happening. Obviously, it's a tense political environment, but to Nate's point, there are very real policy repercussions that are happening, particularly with the FCC chairman and his comments about wanting to prevent this kind of speech, taking action against people who have licenses through the FCC. And so that's something that impacts the life that you lead, is
Right.
at an affiliate station. You're obviously not owned by one of the two companies that has been so far very vocal about pulling back from, airing Jimmy Kimmel. But it's still something that echoes through the work that everybody does in television and in broadcasting.
Right, it does. And I know that there's a lot of people out there concerned. I've been talking to some of my friends who are television journalists who have very differing opinions about this and just kind of wondering, what can we say, what can't we say when it comes to expressing, whether it be fact or opinion, on a TV network. What will you be allowed to say? Some of the best advice I received when I started in this business 17 years ago was someone is always watching you.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Whether that be on TV, whether that's in public, whether it's on social media, someone is always watching what you say. And I think to the point that Randy and Nate were making, we're kind of getting to the point. I can say right now the sky is blue, but there might be 4 different people who have a different opinion about that.
Yeah.
Someone might say, well, actually, the sky is red. Someone might say the sky doesn't exist. Someone might say, I hate the sky.
Well, you had a shirt go viral on social media because it was a checkered pattern.
I did. I wore a shirt that was black and white. Someone on the news the other day, it was actually on 9/11, and someone said, they accused me of being in support of Hamas because they said that pattern represented Hamas. I had no idea at all. I was just wearing that was my clean shirt for the day. I had no idea. So you never.
I noticed today you're sticking to the blue and white check.
Exactly.
And just be safe.
Keeping it very neutral as much as I can.
I want to take a call from Ed in Orange Park. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning. Let's not forget that when individuals like George Floyd were killed, and you had some people that were celebrating his death, that they also suffer consequences when it comes to their jobs, careers, and so on. So you cannot have it both ways. Regarding Jimmy Kimmel, the main problem, let's say, is about making money. That's what he's there for. The show was tanking. It has a 72% drop from the height of that hour for the station. And that has consequences. We know quite well that you can be as outrageous as you want to. If the money comes in large quantity, you keep the job.
Ed, thank you. The connection there is terrible. I kind of ask this to Ed, but the idea of consequences coming from quote unquote cancel culture versus an official source seems like a little bit of a distinction there, Randy.
I think he's right, actually. I do think Jimmy Kimmel, I think they use it as an excuse to terminate the show because it wasn't making money.
Interesting.
But I do think that we saw council culture on the left, and now we're seeing it, quite frankly, on the right. Does it make it? I don't agree with it, but that's what's happening.
I think I would just say that, again, the fact pattern that you have the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission imploring these private actors to fire or take action against Jimmy Kimmel because of his comments, and implying that the FCC will have more work to do if they don't do it, and then it happens. Those comments are at bare minimum incredibly reckless and problematic from a free speech perspective, and I don't know that they are at bare minimum just that.
Got a call from Michael on the north side. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, good morning. I was glad to hear one of your panelists say that it's disturbing to see Donald Trump call, for the removal of Jimmy Kimmel, a private citizen just voicing his opinion, and then potentially the head of the FCC threatening the company, that he works for if he's not off the air, because that doesn't seem normal when it comes to the media. And I think, unfortunately, the media has contributed to the normalization of Donald Trump, whether it be him consistently deriding reporters when they're asking questions, whether it be him calling the media the enemy of the people, or any number of things that he's done that's unusual and potentially dangerous. I feel like the media just reports on it without saying, hey, this isn't normal to have a president say, what a stupid question, who do you work for, this and that. Or this isn't normal to say, yeah, the press, they're the enemy of the people. I truly feel like if this country elected a dog, most of the media would say, today President Fido said bow wow in other news, and just move on, as opposed to just saying, hey guys, we elected a dog. This isn't normal. So again, I think there should be more of that. I understand you guys want to be unbiased and appear to be neutral, but at the very least, it should be said presidential behavior or normal presidential behavior is not what we see from President Trump. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the call. I do want to move on and talk just briefly about the sale of the JEA Tower downtown, because that is an iconic mid-century modern building. A lot of people are glad to see that it's not, for instance, slated to be torn down. So, Dave, just catch us up on what we learned this week about it being purchased.
Yeah, so the JEAs put it up for sale, and a local company, Live Oak, is going to be leading the development team that would take this office building and turn it into an apartment building, basically. And they would make some changes, obviously, on the inside. I think Nate, when he was covered JEA, famously compared the inside to the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. So there'll be some changes, obviously, in the inside. And then on the outside, they are going to preserve this sort of distinctive honeycomb exterior that really makes it stand out in the skyline. But with some changes, there's going to be some strips down the middle that are going to be for additional window space and balconies. So it's going to be the same but different. But it would preserve the building and create some more housing, and it would cease to be a dead zone in downtown, which it is right now.
And there was only one other bidder. This is not a final deal. They've bid $1 million. They're going to come back looking for some tax incentives.
They will definitely come back with tax incentives. Circling back to our original conversation about the budget, that is one place where the budget has grown, is these tax incentives and cash for development to happen downtown. So they're going to come back for sure with tax incentives. And they still have to finalize the negotiations for the actual acquisition of the tower in the next door building and a parking garage and get that approved. So they offered $1 million for it. We'll see if that's the final price that they end up paying.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. David Bauerlein, Nate Monroe, Anthony Austin, Randy DeFoor. Thank you guys so much for coming in today.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Ann.
it.